You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome to episode 49 of the DFO Rundown. I'm Jason Gregor alongside Frank Seravalli. And, well, you can't see me. We're having some technical issues. Frank, of course, is live in the woodjerseys.com studio. He's got his lovely Toronto Maple Leafs wood jersey with him. And, of course, you can rep your favorite team with this unique piece of wall art. The wooden jersey, really intricate. They got the brand new Seattle, and they're going to have all the teams by the summer. So go there regularly. You can get one ordered. Makes your fan cave, any room in your house, your office, take it to the next level. Frank, how you doing?
I'm good. Busy week, busy weekend, and lots more coming with free agency just under 48 hours away.
Oh, yeah, there's lots going on, man. I guess let's get to it. The Philadelphia Flyers, another big trade in Jakub Voracek. And, you know, I was crunching some numbers on Jakub Voracek, and in the last 5 years, he's got the 14th most assists in the National Hockey League. And Patrick Laine has the 10th most goals. Like, to me, this seems like a marriage potentially made in heaven for these two. Laine needs a playmaker, and Voracek can definitely do that.
Yeah, I think he's going to be sneaky good next year. I've been saying that for the last couple of weeks. That guy's got 60-plus points written all over him. He actually had a pretty decent productivity-wise season this year. The Flyers were just looking for a change. Obviously needed to make some cap changes as well, $8.25 million. And I kind of like Chuck Fletcher's viewpoint here. We can't keep bringing back the same players and expect different results. So they tried to do a number of different things on their cap front. They traded a lot to get rid of Shane Gostisbehere and his cap hit. They were trying at a certain point on James Van Riemsdyk, and no one bit. And so Jake Voracek, they get a competent player in return in Cam Atkinson as well, a former 30-goal scorer who's got some spunk and some speed. He's a shorthanded goal specialist. And you know what I really like about this trade, not just with no retained salary, it's a salary cap wash, or a real cash wash, I should say, for the Flyers and Blue Jackets. But in a really awkward summer for James Van Riemsdyk, he now gets a good buddy in Cam Atkinson that's come in and has sort of revived a little bit of his interest there. So you've got a goal scorer in JVR that stays in the fold at I think a pretty reasonable cap hit based on what he's historically provided. And in Columbus, as you said, Jake Voracek, he's a guy that, I think he's so underrated in terms of his ability to carry the puck into the zone on his own as a zone entry machine. He's one of the best in the league at that. I think 6th in the NHL in assists since the original trade to the Flyers. So pretty talented player that's going to be highly motivated.
Now, that was the story. Of course, the big story really happened late in the first round, that a lot of people were surprised when the Montreal Canadiens drafted Logan Mailloux, who, of course, he had tried to opt out. Now, I know that legally you can't opt out of the draft, but were you surprised that Montreal chose him?
Not really surprised in the sense that I had heard early on Friday that there were a number of teams that were interested in taking Logan Mailloux in the second round. And I think the Habs just jumped that and wanted to make sure that they got the guy that they wanted. But I think it's been problematic from three perspectives. And it's, first and foremost is the victim. She's had her life turned upside down in the last 10 plus months here since the incident. And I think in a lot of ways, for a player that a lot of people were expecting repercussions from, there are none, because Logan Mailloux, who some teams saw as a borderline first round player anyway, still ends up getting picked in the first round after this crime and paying the fine. I think this does a disservice to Logan Mailloux, the player and person, because he's now been forced to answer questions after renouncing himself from the draft and, basically saying that he wasn't mature enough and didn't deserve this opportunity based on his transgression. And then I think this also does a disservice to the Montreal Canadiens and their fan base and their brand. I mean, let's face it, they could have had this a lot better prepared than they did. If you were to come out on Friday night and say, we're selecting Logan Mailloux, and these are the 5 steps that we're taking in our concrete action plan. We've thought this through. We've done our due diligence. Here's X, Y, and Z, what we're doing, and present that to everyone. I think at least people would be a little bit more comfortable with the idea of it, knowing that they were well prepared. And I think the way that they've sort of willy-nilly gone about this since then, not having that plan in place, still now just formulating it, I think they look like a team that was unprepared. And I think they've also done a disservice, to their fan base as well, who have so many questions that haven't been answered. And you see the really awkward press conference from their chief scout in Trevor Timmons. Didn't end up being a good look for them.
No, not a good look. And it's funny how I think had he been in the second or third round, people would have changed because they felt like, well, because he wasn't taken in the first round, there were some consequences. And, obviously he's dealt with it on a legal side and it's still dealing with it. And, that's his own issue. But it's fair to question, Montreal, it's like their competitive nature took over rather than look at maybe what was optically the best thing to do.
Well, and you know what? I'm okay with that. Just come out and say it then. Because how do you think the New England Patriots have been so successful? I mean, they took on players who had broken the law, weren't going to be signed somewhere else, and gave them a home, and they've won Super Bowls because of it. Bill Belichick has been very transparent in just the fact that he's here to build a winner, not win press conferences. And fans have gotten behind that. So, I think it's that just be clear in your objectives. And I think everyone can live and understand that, that if that's the case, but instead, they've sort of been half in, half out. And this is one of those stories that you just can't do that with.
No, and it's definitely one where, hopefully people learn from it and move forward to, from what Mailloux did that was clearly wrong from the get-go. And, you hope that the young woman involved here will be okay long-term from this. And, everybody in society just have to reconsider some of their actions at times and look and say, hey, wait a sec. So, there's definitely lots of people have to learn. And the Montreal Canadiens, I agree with you, Frank, transparency on anything. If we want to have tough conversations, then you have to start the conversation and open it rather than just say nothing, which ends up always being worse. Nowadays, more than ever, people like to communicate. So come on. And I don't have to agree with you, but I'll respect you when you give me what your plan is and what your ideals are on it. So we'll kind of move from there. Now, free agency starts in 2 days on Wednesday. And, there's lots of big names out there. You had your free agent top 75 board at dailyfaceoff.com. And no surprise, Dougie Hamilton's right at the top of it. Who do you see? Do you have a few teams, Frank, that are like front runners you think to land Dougie Hamilton? Because everybody knows he's out there. I haven't seen a ton of, well, this team's an automatic fit. Where do you see him going?
Well, he's been already linked to New Jersey. And so that has to give me some sort of indication that at least the Devils have, at the very least, put some feelers out there about their interest in Dougie Hamilton. And that's really kind of the tough part about talking about all this, is that they're not supposed to. Like, this is, that's not within the rules. So let's just determine that before we go any further and just say that, whatever is said here or whatever has been reported out there, like, there's pretty clear rules in place. There's no interview period this year. Dougie Hamilton's a little bit different since he was given permission. Zach Hyman was given permission to talk to other teams. So Dougie Hamilton and Hyman are in a unique situation in that case. Patrick Nemeth, there's a report out there from Larry Brooks at the New York Post that the defenseman will ultimately be signing with the New York Rangers on Wednesday. A couple of the buyout guys, so if you hear their names connected to teams, Ryan Suter, Keith Yandel, Tony DeAngelo, they all are unrestricted free agents at the moment and can agree to terms but can't register the contract until Wednesday. So just set the ground rules from that perspective. Dougie Hamilton, as you pointed out, linked to New Jersey. I wonder still about a team like Seattle, oodles of cap space. This is the type of player that you would want to use it on, given his really unique and consistent offensive nature, and something that they also just don't have, an element that they don't have on their blue line at the moment. So I'd have to think about Seattle. It sounds like they touched base at some point during the exclusive window as well. Dougie Hamilton to me is sort of right at the top, and then a very close second is Gabriel Landeskog, and then there's probably a pretty significant drop-off from there.
Well, it is fascinating. So let's start with the guys in Suter and Yandel, Parise, And you mentioned Tony DeAngelo. So 3 defensemen and a forward who have already bought out. I think, Parise is likely going to get the lowest AAV amongst those players. And, Ryan Suter, that buyout's still a little perplexing to me just because there's no savings really and outside of year one for Minnesota.
It's not perplexing for me. That was
really?
That was a room cleanser is what that was. That was our team is heading in a different direction. Ryan Suter quite clearly had the ear of the owner there. Some people called him Craig Leopold's best friend. I don't know how that always worked out with his teammates. And so, some people think Ryan Suter is a locker room lawyer, difficult guy to be around. And that's why I'm really interested to see where he lands. Is it immediately with a cup contender? He's been linked to Dallas. I know Boston has interest. Florida has interest. Those are all teams that are in the mix for Ryan Suter. And what kind of deal is he going to get? Is he going to get some term? Because I think everyone thinks he can still play a bit.
Oh, I don't doubt he can play. And it's funny to mention that, Frank, because the key thing is, Suter, when he got all that big money from the owner, I think now that, they're like, hey, owner's probably talking to him lots. Well, when he goes to a new team, that's not going to be the case. He's not going to have the big contract or anything. And you wonder how quickly he can adapt and be just, another one of the guys in the room. And I think probably on a veteran team with a really strong leadership core in the locker room, it's a lot easier to absorb a player like that in your room.
And that's why I think a team like a Boston would make a little bit more sense. You've got a Bergeron who's been there forever that everyone looks up to. I think it might be a little bit more difficult in Dallas. Not to say that Jamie Benn isn't a strong leader, but I just think it's different in Dallas, especially with the young guys on their back end that really play a significant role like a Miro Heiskanen. So does Ryan Suter overshadow any of that? And then how does he fit in there? And Florida, I could see him fitting in Florida as well.
The team I'm fascinated by the most, Colorado, because you got Landeskog, Grubauer, and Brandon Saad. Those are 3. They're rated 2nd, 3rd, and 11th on your free agents 75 board, Frank. And, obviously really good players. Gabriel Landeskog, the captain. Saad came in and just does what he usually does, scores 20 goals and, grinds it out with some good possession numbers. And Philip Grubauer had a breakout year. Like Colorado, they just signed Makar, and I like that contract for them. But, man, you lose those 3 players. I'm kind of curious, who are you going to replace them with to remain competitive?
Yeah, I still think Colorado is the odds-on favorite to keep Landeskog. I just, like I said before on the pod, those guys have gone to some dark places in negotiations and have made it through to the other side. I'm not as sold about Grubauer because I think they're holding pretty firm, knowing that they're probably going to have to pay Landeskog. And so my intel suggests that they've held really firm on Grubauer at 5x5. And Grubauer thinks coming off of this, or at least his camp thinks that coming off of this Vezina finalist season that he played so well, that he deserves to be somewhere in the 6s. Now, the only thing is that the numbers would suggest based on recent comps, and I put this out there as I sized up the goalie market, which to me is so fascinating and we can dive into in a second, is the comps would suggest that Grubauer probably shouldn't be a penny over where Robin Lehner was last year with Vegas, 5x5. You look at right before they signed, Robin Lehner, same age, 29. Lehner played 135 games. Grubauer played 113. Lehner's save percentage then 919, Grubauer 918. So, the comp would suggest that that's sort of the ceiling, which is why I understand why Colorado is held firm. Now, with regards to Saad, I don't see him coming back. I guess it's possible, but I think a couple teams out west have been interested. Los Angeles would be one. He was mentioned with Pittsburgh. He's a Pittsburgh kid. That would be interesting. And then I think the rest of the field would be pretty open for Saad in terms of that scoring punch. And you said, who could they replace him with? One guy that I think they've been interested in is Jaden Schwartz. Now, a lot of people think Schwartz is a done deal to go to Seattle. I don't think it's done yet, but I think there was certainly a mutual flirtation process that went on during the exclusive window.
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued to see what Seattle does, considering how cautious they were with cap space at the actual draft and saved themselves a lot of room. And, if, and Ron Francis has talked about it a lot. I don't see him just spending like a crazy man by any stretch, but I look at their lineup, especially up front. They got to get some other offensive guys if they truly want to be competitive. But Colorado and Landeskog, that does make sense. The goalie market is interesting because you know what? There's, Toronto, the Avalanche, of course. Who knows what Vegas is going to do? Although I wouldn't be surprised if they actually just stuck with their two goaltenders. Mrazek's out there. The Buffalo Sabres clearly need goaltenders. Linus Ullmark, Frank, is an interesting name because I could talk to Kevin Woodley and other guys, and most believe he's the best goalie available. Obviously, There's a little bit of concern about injuries, but Linus Ullmark, I could easily see Colorado just going to Grubauer and saying, you know what? You don't want this? I think Linus Ullmark would take it because there's nothing in Linus Ullmark that suggests that he would be asking for $6 million based on his career and his games played thus far.
Well, it's funny you said that because I think that's exactly what Ullmark is asking for. My understanding is that his camp, the ask in Buffalo has been the Jacob Markstrom contract, 6 times 6. So, I mean, if they were going to pay it, I would think that they would have already done it and he would be off the market. But it is fascinating to me that Buffalo still, and we mentioned this on the pod last week, is, why did they protect Ullmark? They must clearly think they could still get him. My sense going back to the trade deadline was that he was going to be testing the market. And so they've held off. I just don't see Ullmark landing in Colorado if he hits the market. I think the team that has him circled is the Toronto Maple Leafs. I just think they can't afford necessarily even to get to 5 times 5 based on the other guys that they have on their roster, based on their cap situation and based on, guys that, they want to still other positions they need to fill out.
Yeah. Toronto's a tough one for me because I don't see how they have the money, Frank. I agree with you wholeheartedly. There would have to be some other moves to be made, and maybe that's why they're holding firm to try to get any sort of pick from Edmonton, so that to get the 8-year deal, because maybe they can get more assets, even if they're late ones, to try to trade some players off and add picks to ship some guys out of town with contracts. Because
I think they're holding firm on the Hyman thing, though.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. They're holding firm, but
but they're not going to just take a late 6th or 7th round pick to make it happen.
Yeah, no, and there's the argument. I see where I see both sides of that. You're like, I can take a pick. It's not going to be until 2022. That pick's, 5 years at best before it plays. Dubas might not even be the GM in 6 years. Like the NHL, how many guys are GMs for a decade, realistically? So I can see his reasoning to say, I'm not going to help Edmonton, even though they're not in our division anymore. They're not in our conference. You know what? If I save them $400 or $450K in cap space every year, that's a benefit. There's really little benefit for our team to do it. But at the same time, you know what? I see Toronto, and if they're not bringing Anderson back, and you've reported it and a few others have said there really hasn't been any serious talk there, how do they get a goalie upgrade? Because as good as Jack Campbell was for them, Frank, I'm not sold that those numbers are repeatable.
It's not even that the numbers are repeatable. He just doesn't scream, this is a team that, he's going to lead us to a playoff series win. He doesn't inspire that confidence, that really good feeling, in your chest that you need when you have a team. He battles. He's a great story. He's a nice guy. He's all those things. Repeatability is 1, and 2 is just, does he inspire the confidence? Is he the big name? Is he the splash that you need? And in the same exact breath, I don't know how they could possibly go back to Freddie Anderson in that sense. I think he's a 4th, 5th, 6th option for them, and we'll see where he goes. Does he end up in Carolina? What are the Canes doing? They need a starter and a backup. I'm still scratching my head over the Nedeljkovic thing. I in a way, I admire Carolina, and we've had Don Waddell on to talk about their path and how they see things, but that kid's good. He just is. And they love him. His teammates love him. Ned, he's a competitor and he wins. He's won a Calder Cup. He was a homegrown guy. If you go back and you look, this smells like a Jason Gregor story. And I was thinking about this over the weekend because you've been so good at historically looking back on trends and things that have happened. Almost every guy that's won the Stanley Cup the last decade plus is a homegrown goalie. I mean, you go back, you look at Vasilevsky, you look at Binnington every single year, Holtby, whatever, Matt Murray. I'm just trying to go back in my head and think about the last cup winners. Corey Crawford was, that's 2015. 14 was Jonathan Quick. He was 13.
Tim Thomas
Crawford
in
again
Boston.
is the last one that wasn't.
Yeah.
They've all been homegrown. So why'd you trade Nedeljkovic?
Well, maybe they feel that he's not their guy, obviously, because the funny thing is, and you had reported that, he was asking for 3.5. Well, he ends up settling for $3 million. And I'm just like, well, $3 million, it's not even a number that seems outlandish to sign him for. That's the part that's kind of perplexing to me. So I don't know, maybe their scouts feel that he's just, he's going to get exposed, which seems a little odd to me. And like, now if they re-sign Bernier, right? Or I shouldn't say re-sign. If they sign Bernier, at least then I'm like, okay, well, they got Bernier and they got a pick for Nedeljkovic. And well, Bernier is definitely older. If they feel like Bernier put up some pretty good numbers on a bad Detroit team the last year.
He did.
You wonder that if on a team like Carolina, and that's the other thing, Frank, like you look historically at Carolina, man, they're such a good possession team. You wonder how guys are going to do outside. Like, it's funny when you look at possession numbers on players and how vastly they can change. Ben Chariot's a prime example. From Winnipeg, you look at his numbers, then you go to Montreal, massive difference, right? Like a lot of it can be who you're playing with and the system you're playing. So
first off, I would say Ben Chiarot is just a good player. I think the Jets would be the first to tell you that they really missed him. But let me tell you how they went through this with Nedeljkovic. He asked for 3.5 and they were willing to give him 1.75. Now, my understanding is that's what they're trying to pigeonhole Jonathan Bernier in at 1.75. And if you're Bernier, like, why would you have any reason to take it? I mean, you could go somewhere else. I listed all the teams as we're sizing up the goalie market, all the ones that are looking for backups. I mean, the list is pretty significant. Calgary, Nashville, New Jersey, Philly, Tampa Bay, and Washington. Then you could also have Vancouver. If Koskinen doesn't come back to Edmonton, the Oilers, and all those teams, the Flyers and the Devils specifically, are looking for well-established veterans to pair up with Carter Hart and Mackenzie Blackwood. So that's a lot of options to say, I'm just going to take 1.75 to be on your team.
Well, Carolina, they have tons of cap space. Now, they've got some guys, that like Dougie Hamilton, maybe they can get him back, but, I doubt it. They don't have a lot of, they've got most of their big players, signed. Now they've got to get Svechnikov and Foegele under contract. And so, I think those are definitely doable contracts, but is Carolina, Frank, are they just playing that they believe that they're going to go, are they going to make a pitch for Ullmark or Grubauer here and nobody's talking about it and suddenly they swoop in because they clearly need a starter?
I don't think so. I think their mantra is just that they're not paying a goaltender big money. They think the position is volatile. They think that from year to year it changes in terms of stability, and that you could essentially flip a coin. That my guess is, and maybe they blow this all out of the water and I look like an idiot reading the tea leaves. I think that they want to spend as little on goaltending as possible. That they think that they could get just as much from someone in the $3 million range as they could someone in the $6 million range, and that's their play.
It's going to be fascinating to watch because, man, like they've been a really good team for a long time. And we all know that come playoff time, the goaltending position is ultra important. So even if you think it's volatile, you better get one that you believe can play in the postseason. Otherwise, you virtually have no chance. Now, moving to the blue line, Frank, we've talked a lot about Dougie Hamilton, and he was obviously a big one. Tyson Barrie's an intriguing name. Now, I know the Oilers and him have talked contract. Tyson Barrie, when you've got Ethan Bear and Evan Bouchard, I don't think all three of those guys on the right side makes a lot of sense, right? Edmonton also doesn't have a ton of cap space. I think Barrie would like longer term here a little bit. Seattle's got a ton of defensemen. What are your thoughts? Where do you see a fit for Tyson Barrie?
I mean, I do see a fit for Tyson Barrie in Edmonton. I think the Oilers are interested. I think Barrie is interested. And I don't know that the term is exactly what you might think it would need to be. I think Tyson Barrie, you could get him for 3 times 5.25. And I think it can flex based on the type of term that you want to give him. If you give him a 4th year, you could probably slide the number down a little bit, maybe to 5. 4 times 5 is 20. Or if you want to go 2 years, you could probably get him at 6. That's my guess sort of on how things have played out to this point. And like I said, I think the interest is mutual. I think they would be working hard to try and get him. I think there's other teams though that want him. I know the Calgary Flames are looking for a left shot defenseman. They're pretty well set up on the right side, but they also don't have anyone to really run their power play efficiently. So I could see Calgary being interested. I think Florida is also looking for a power play guy to kind of do what Yandel did. And so I think those are sort of some of the options. And then I think Seattle would also make a lot of sense for a Tyson Barrie as well, because they don't have that element that we were just talking about.
Yeah, the problem for Edmonton, they basically now, I'm assuming James Neal gets bought out. Now, I know the Oilers had some trade talks with some teams, and I'm not going to pretend to know how close it was. All I know is that whatever trade talk they were having kind of went by the wayside on the weekend. So, maybe they'll try to fire that back up. Tomorrow's the deadline that you can waive him and buy him out. Now, technically, they could use the second window if Cooper Marody files for arbitration. That would be the only way. He's the only RFA eligible for arbitration. So I think it's more likely Neal's bought out. But that means they got $10 million basically for 4 players. If you get Barrie, even $5 million, Frank, even if you get him at 5, now you got to fill out a left defenseman, a third line center, and a left winger for $5 million. That's pretty tough to do. Unless you think you're going to go bargain hunting and get some really quality players at $1.5 million.
Well, I think that's sort of the market that they would be looking in. And look, who knows what kind of, what they could dig up. I mean, you saw Patrick Nemeth. He was much further down on my board. He was 49th. He made $3 million last year. And it sounds like from the New York Post that he's going to come in somewhere between 2 and 2.5. I don't know what they do on the left side. Who are some of the guys that they might be looking at? And then if they don't go after, if they don't get Tyson Barrie, like what are they looking at? By the way, Derek Forbort, I saw he was linked to Boston. He would make sense as a left shot guy that actually had a really good year in Winnipeg. I'm just scrolling through my list here.
Ian Cole.
John Merrill. I don't think that he makes any sense. I think a guy that, by the way, as I was making this list, check out number 42, Yanni Hakanpää. Teams love him.
I looked into him. Scouts tell me, big body, physical, that they're worried about, how quick he computes the game or not. But I
have not heard that at all. What I heard, Jay, was that he doesn't make mistakes. He's pretty steady and competent. He doesn't give up home runs. And then there was the Kulikov option, but Kulikov to me seems to have run his course almost everywhere he's been.
Yeah, the thing with Kulikov is he can play really well, but then he's prone to that big 10-bell error that ends up in the back of your net. I will say, you mentioned Derek Forbort. The reason I like Derek Forbort, there's a few. Number one, he can play left or right, and I think versatility on the back end's huge. And another guy who I would link potentially to Edmonton, Frank, is Tucker Pullman. Now, Tucker Pullman, you know what? Because did you know he played 44% of his time against elite forwards last year? Now, he's paired with Josh Morrissey. Right. And he's one of those guys that doesn't maybe get a lot of talk, but if you're a defenseman who can just kind of eat minutes, right, and especially if you can hold your own against the top end players, there's definitely value in that. And the other right defenseman that I think actually would make sense for Edmonton, because I did a comparison over the last 2 seasons, Cody Ceci and Adam Larson have basically played identical minutes 5-on-5, 1786 for Larson, 1779, like a difference of 7 minutes. Ceci actually has better possession numbers in all of those. Now, Larson's more physical, and Larson had more defensive zone starts, right? Ceci actually played more time in the penalty kill, but gave up more goals. Edmonton's penalty kill has been pretty good. I wouldn't be like Cody Ceci for years. Like his numbers, his analytics numbers were off, right? And he was making like $4 million. But at 1.25, Frank, like Cody Ceci's a player, I think teams are going to look at it and say, hey, we don't want this guy to have to play a lot of tough defensive zone minutes. but he can fill minutes for you at not a big cost, and he's a big body who doesn't get injured a lot. I think, Edmonton's looking to find a right and a left defenseman to kind of split the minutes of Larson, because I don't see one guy on the free agent market who's as physical, blocks all the shots, does everything. Now Dougie Hamilton obviously does, but he's in a different category, right? And so I think when you look for certain teams like Edmonton, the Larson created a pretty big hole, so they have to try to find two guys to fill, because while they like Chris Russell at this stage is probably a 50-game guy, because he gets hurt because he's blocking shots with his face and his ankles and everywhere else. And, he's a smaller guy. I think he breaks down. I think that's what they want. And I'm also intrigued to look at the third line center, because there's a lot of teams out there. And Nick Bonino, I know you have him, Frank, at number 39. I want to talk about the centers, because you have Deneau well up there, as you should. He's at number 7. Wenberg from Florida, you have him at number 13. Paul Stastny, we haven't heard a lot about, who can still play, is a guy. And I was surprised that you actually had Bonino and Holla below Glendening, because I think Glendening's basically a 4. He's a specialist. He's a good 4. But Holla and Bonino at least have the potential to give you some offense in the 3-hole.
I understand where you're coming from. I think Glendening's a guy where the phone's just been ringing off the hook. I think, just to address some of the names you brought up, I think Paul Stastny's got a lot of game left. I really do. And I think when you look at Wenberg, he had a fantastic offensive season. He actually remains in talks with Florida. They're trying to find a way to keep him and bring him back. 16 goals in 55 games, basically a career year in that sense, on a 1-year deal after being bought out. And so he's looking to get paid. I think teams that have evaluated Wenberg, though, say that he is basically Alex Kerfoot in terms of what you can actually expect to get from him in production. Sort of in that 10 to 12, 13, 14 goal range. He's not going to come back and score 16 again, just had a really good year. And the other center you mentioned was Deneau. I mean, Deneau's cashing in as the premier sort of defensive center on the market. So he's going to get well paid. It's funny, like another guy that hasn't really received a ton of publicity that, I think can come in and really have a dynamic season on a 1-year deal is David Krejci. A lot of teams were saying to me, I'd rather have David Krejci on a 1-year deal rather than Alex Wenberg on a 4-year deal and see if I can figure out, get another 40, 50 point season out of David Krejci. So there hasn't been a lot of talk about him going back to Boston. He's been there 15 years, almost 1,000 games with one team. He's another guy on that center market that's interesting.
Last year we saw Tyson Barrie have to sign kind of that show me contract. Played very well, worked out on the power play in Edmonton. You also had Mike Hoffman, similar. Now he got $4 million, but a short-term deal. Are there players that you get a sense in conversations that are high on your list, but might have to settle for that short-term contract?
I mean, Tony DeAngelo is the obvious one at number 12, right? He's going to have lots of options. I think his preference would be to get some term so that he doesn't sort of have to go through this again. But I think any team that's looking at him that needs to get a green light from ownership in order to sign him based on his past transgressions and his career, that they're saying, we don't want the risk. We'll sign him for 1 year and see how it goes, the sort of prove me contract, but prove it contract. If he can come in though and put up another 50+ point season and help a team win a couple rounds in the playoffs, well, then Tony DeAngelo is going to bounce back as a $6 million defenseman somewhere. So he's young, still just 25, has a lot, has some growing up to do. And, I hope he's taken the last 6 months since he was exiled from the Rangers to do that. But it's interesting, though, about a guy like Hoffman, because Hoffman was on the block of the trade deadline, didn't get traded, came in on a 1-year deal and scored 17 goals in 49 games. That equates out to somewhere around 27 in a normal 82-game season. So right in the usual Mike Hoffman special, the typical year. And it's funny because Hoffman actually really grew on the Blues in the last half of the season after the deadline, the last third of the season. They felt like he dug in a lot, and they were like, oh, they totally changed their opinion of him. And I think as we get close to the deadline here, to the market opening, the Blues are right in the mix to re-sign him to a longer-term deal where he might actually end up getting a raise on his AAV, which is interesting enough. So, I think the Blues and Hoffman continue to talk, and he's a really interesting guy moving forward.
Another player who I believe might be in that category of a show-me contract, who I think will give you good value, is Thomas Tatar. Thomas Tatar, the last 3 NHL seasons, is 22nd in the entire league at 5-on-5 scoring. And when you look at value players who can contribute, he's got excellent possession numbers, 5-on-5. I know he didn't play in the postseason. And I think that's probably going to hurt Thomas Tatar in his negotiations, because recency bias is a legit thing. People are going to look at it. They're going to look at his career in the playoffs and say, geez, he hasn't done a lot. I'm telling you, if you're a team that needs help 5-on-5 scoring, Thomas Tatar is the guy I'm looking at all day long. Because when you're and he's 22nd, Frank, on a team, and I really like Phil Deneau, but no one really associates Phil Deneau as like a dominant offensive center. He's a good 5-on-5 player, right? And Gallagher, maybe it was just a good combination of the three of them. But man, I think a 1-year bet on Thomas Tatar, I've said it, like the team, Edmonton would be ideal. Now they've got Hyman and Nugent Hopkins. So if you get Tatar, then you would probably move Nugent Hopkins to your third line center, which I'm not sure I think they'd ideally like to just keep him on the wing and get a third line center who can compete with Ryan McLeod. Mm-hmm. But, Edmonton I think there's an option there to go with 2 left wingers and a center, but I really like him as a surprise. And the other guy that you have way down on your list is Sean Corrali out of Boston, Frank. And there's just a lot of little nuances about his game. I think that's a player who I'm kind of surprised hasn't re-signed, but there's a lot, like he's a bottom 6 forward on your team, no question. But I think Sean Corrali can get you really good value in the free agent market. So I want your thoughts on him. And the one guy who everybody thought was going to re-sign in New York and yet to hasn't is Casey Cizikas. What happened to him?
Yeah, I don't know what happens to Casey Cizikas. I just in calling around to, GMs and agents over the last, few days, someone said Casey Cizikas was looking for $5 million. And I was like, $5 million? Like, really? I get that he's got a 20 goal season on his resume. I get that he's been a valuable part of what the New York Islanders have been building, but my God, that feels like a lot of money. And again, I say that not knowing if it's accurate, but just as a disclaimer, but that was the chatter. And I was like, that's a lot. I agree with you on Corrali. And I also like about him is that having watched the Bruins playoff runs pretty closely, when they got to the final in 19, like he was a pretty big part of their success in terms of that grind that they had to your team coming at, playing against teams coming at you in waves. He was a big part of that. So I could see Corrali certainly having some value. And by the way, another guy that I think has interest and a lot of people think is going to Seattle, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. I think I view him in that same category, the sort of prototypical bottom 6 forward energy, pretty consistent in terms of production and goals. And I want just to close the loop on the conversation we were having about stylistic fits for a team like the Oilers and what they're looking for on their back end is Zach Bogosian. Now, I'm told Zach Bogosian is not going to play in Canada. He wants to stay in the U.S. To go with another Gregor theme from a couple weeks ago about Canadian teams having a really hard time signing U.S. players, he is off the list for the Canadian teams, even after a good season in Toronto.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One other team, the Vancouver Canucks. They made a huge trade, of course, and I don't think there's any question that their team has infinitely improved their talent for this year. If you're concerned about Oliver Ekman-Larsson's long-term contract, okay, that's valid. But the 2 players they got from Arizona are much better than the 3 players they shipped out. And the cap hits right now going to be very similar. So I think for the first year, there's a no-brainer to me in Vancouver. But what about Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson, Frank? Do you think a 3- and 4-year deal is ultimately here? Or are they going to get these guys signed long-term?
My guess is that they both sort of end up in that bridge territory. I don't know what the real incentive is to sign long-term. Like, get a little bit of piece of security now, something that makes you comfortable, that, you can probably, if everything were to go awry, that you could end up retiring and not have to work again. but hold out, give yourself some time to really bounce back, especially after, a little bit of a down year for Hughes. And obviously the injuries that popped up with Pettersson. Play the long game. If I were the agent to those two guys, that's what I would be sort of preaching. And it is interesting about the Canucks though. Like, what do they do with Nate Schmidt? Do they find a trade partner for him? What's going on with Braden Holtby? I was told on Sunday that it was either we're trading you or buying you out. So it seems like he's not coming back. So what do they do with the backup position on their team? And they've just got a lot of forwards to figure out. They've got 8 guys under contract for next season. And that includes Highmore, McEwen, and Nils Höglander. So like they've got some work to do to fill out their roster and a little bit of flexibility, but not a ton given the contracts that need to get signed for Pettersson and Hughes.
We heard lots of scuttlebutt for 2 months about the Calgary Flames and that they were going to, now they lost Giordano. It's a pretty big name to Seattle in the expansion draft, but haven't seen a move. Has it gone quiet? Is Calgary going to bring back their same core group again?
I think they'd like to make a change. I think they've been talking to teams. I think they've been investigating what the market is like for Johnny Gaudreau. And I think after seeing what that was like, my sense is that now in the beginning of this week before free agency opens is that they're circling back to the Gaudreau camp to find out what it would cost to get an extension done. Now, I do think Calgary is really working hard on the defense market. They're like I said, the right side of their D is pretty shored up with Anderson and Tanev. But they're looking for some help on the left side to play with, Hanifin, excuse me, slip of the tongue there because man, it would still look pretty good if Dougie Hamilton was there. Hanifin is on their left side, and then you've got Valimaki and Shillington. Connor Mackey's a young guy that they think could be something someday, but they're definitely looking on the left side of their defense. They're looking for that sort of third, fourth line center position. I still think that there's probably some change coming, but I'm a little bit surprised that it hasn't happened yet. And that could be one of those deals that maybe goes down later in the summer.
Tampa Bay Lightning. Here we are. And technically right now, today, Frank,
under the cap.
They're under the cap. Granted, they've only got 17 players signed, so they're going to have to sign some. But it looks like they already lost Gaudreau. Blake Coleman, you have him very high in your list. I think he'll be highly sought after by a lot of different teams. But they've got their top five. Yeah, they've got their top 5 defensemen. They got their goaltender. They obviously need a backup. But is Tyler Johnson, Palat, or Alex Killorn? Like, it would still seem that one of those guys is going to go just to free up some cap space, to fill out other parts of the roster at $1 million for 3 or 4 guys. What do you see Brisebois doing? And, how patient can he be? Are teams just waiting to see what happens in free agency? And then once they don't land their guy, they'll go to Tampa and say, hey, we'll take this guy off your hands. And, for a 6th or a 7th or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do is move Tyler Johnson. He's the guy that's been circled for a long time. Everyone knows that he went through waivers twice last year without being plucked. And it's really the 3 years left on his deal that are inhibiting the transaction. But they're still very much in win mode. And by the way, I checked in because there's always rumor and speculation and innuendo. What's going on with Steven Stamkos? Obviously, a lot of tread on, the tread is worn, I should say, on his tires. And he's been dealing with, feels like injury after injury. But Steven Stamkos isn't going anywhere. The Lightning have not at any point approached him about any sort of transaction or waiving his no move clause. So that's not on the table. So I wanted to put that to bed because for whatever reason, it's always talked about as everyone is thinking, what did the Lightning do to try and create and free up some flexibility? And I think on the back end, they're approaching a few free agents or will about the idea of taking that sort of short 1-year deal, come and prove it here and cash in somewhere else, kind of like a Kevin Shattenkirk did. So one name that I have written down with a question mark in my book is Keith Yandel. Does Keith Yandel make sense for their back end on a short 1-year low money deal to come in and try and win a cup?
Interesting. There are 2 other teams that, older teams that, got a lot of big contracts, the Washington Capitals and the San Jose Sharks. A lot of people felt like, just based on his numbers, that Martin Jones would kind of be primed for a buyout at 5.75 for 3 years remaining. And, it definitely lowers the hit quite a bit. They brought in Aiden Hill, who they still have to sign. I've heard some talk, though, that Martin Jones, his off-season training is kind of getting back. He kind of went away from some of the technical stuff that you should do, and then maybe he's getting back. Do the Sharks, are they just doing what Edmonton is and wait until the last possible moment to buy out Jones, or do you think they might go with the Jones-Hill tandem? And if so, what type of trades, if any, are we going to see out of San Jose?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, look, I really don't know what the Sharks are doing. They haven't to this point, to my knowledge, engaged on, whether or not they're going to buy out Jones. Like, to me, you can say a lot of things about Martin Jones, but goddamn, has he been consistent the last 3 straight seasons at an .896 save percentage, identical in each of those 3 years. 62 games, 41 games, and 34 games. That's like 100 and whatever that comes out to, 137 straight games at an .896 save percentage. Like, that's unbelievable. And I can't believe that they haven't tried to move on from one of their big 3 defensemen on the back end, Karlsson, Burns, or Vlasic. I honestly, it sounds funny to say, but like, obviously the Karlsson deal is so incredibly damaging with his 11.5 hit, but man, 5 years left of Marc-Edouard Vlasic till he's 39. That hurts too. They're all pretty painful in their own way, and they still haven't found a way to surround those guys properly with, some depth to assist them, even though I guess they should be theoretically carrying themselves.
Yeah, like, I look at Washington, and when you see they've got to sign Ovechkin, and we're hearing pretty big numbers for Ovi, so they're going to have to shed some salary. And a lot of people think Nick Jensen makes sense. He's a 2.5 cap hit.
They've been trying to move Nick Jensen for 2.5 years.
Yeah, and so it's easier said than done. And you wonder, do they maybe surprise people? And Justin Schultz, who's got 1 year at $4 million, because they're going to have to move out someone, Frank. There's just, the money doesn't work unless Ovi's going to shock us all and take way below what the expectations are and what he's going to take. And like, you're hearing $9 million and potentially maybe more. So even if he goes to 8, Washington's got to move some guys.
I'd be surprised personally if his deal is not 8 figures. The rumor, the latest one, was 3 times 10. I heard that his initial ask was 12.5 and that they had ballparked or budgeted 11.5. To see him go down to 9 or 10, like, I don't see him taking a pay cut based on how productive and consistent he's been. Yeah, you're right. The back end is awful crowded when you look at slotting players out properly, commensurate to cap hit. Kempney's coming off of his injury. Brendan Dillon is incredibly popular, and they could that'd be the easiest guy to find a landing spot for. But are you making your team worse and moving Dillon? And Schultz, of course, the fact that they exposed him in the expansion draft probably gives you an indication as to, even though he had a productive season, 27 points in 46 games, that he could be a guy that could go as well.
Now, Frank, just for fun, we're actually we're going to do rapid fire with you today. A little bit of free agent rapid fire brought to you by DoorDash, the proud sponsor of the Daily Face-Off, as well as the Nation Network of podcasts, restaurants, and other food delivered right to your door. And right now, if you're a first-time user of the app, you can download the DoorDash app, and you will get 25% off and no delivery fees. All you have to do is use the promo code RUNDOWNDD. That's RUNDOWNDD. Get the DoorDash app to your phone, deliver Popeye's Louisiana chicken, Frank. Used it the other day, the rib chicken. It's unreal. Got it through DoorDash. All right, so we're going to have a little fun and rapid fire today, Frank. No personal questions because I already know enough about you. So I want to get to some fun ones as far as which player do you believe is going to, who everybody thinks is going to be a big-time signer, ends up having to wait and doesn't sign until day 5, 6, or 7 and ends up taking a short-term deal?
There's nothing rapid about this rapid fire. I'm going to say David Savard.
Ooh, I like that one. Okay. Ultimately, which goalie is starting the season in Carolina?
Freddie Anderson.
Who will be the starting goaltender in Colorado?
Philip Grubauer.
Okay. I like it. One last one for you. You mentioned David Krejci. Like, there was all the talk, him and Tuukka Rask. Are we seeing the changing of the guard in Boston, or do one or both return on a short-term lower AAV?
Well, Rask is out until 2022. So my guess is they try and start the year with Swayman and Vladar. And then, if they need to bring back Rask at a certain point, that they do. But Rask doesn't have any interest in playing anywhere else. So I don't think he's going to be signing anywhere else. It's either Boston or that's it.
Okay.
Krejci, I think he goes somewhere else. Why wouldn't they have already gotten it done?
And you've been all over the story from day one. So give me your best guess on who signs Tony DeAngelo.
The Toronto Maple Leafs.
It's a little rapid fire brought to you by DoorDash. Now, Frank, before we go, a few other quick ones. Jake Virtanen, of course, is now a free agent. His agent was on with Rick Dhaliwal talking about on their podcast out of Vancouver, and how it was maybe a combination of obviously his off-ice issues and then his on-ice play. How do you view this? Where do you see the NHL and our team's going to be leery of Virtanen?
Well, I think they should just be leery based on his play. Jake Virtanen doesn't have the hockey IQ or hockey sense to really be an impact player on any team. So I think that's what's holding him back more than his off-ice transgressions, which should still be questioned anyway.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Now, one other one, when you look at, we've had it, there's some pretty big names that have been traded. We saw Seth Jones. Now they got the Jones brothers in Chicago. OEL and Garland went to Arizona. The Philadelphia Flyers have been just wheeling and dealing all over the place. But here we are, no Jack Eichel. What's your latest on Jack Eichel and what happens with him?
Man, was Kevin Adams' press conference telling what's going on with Jack Eichel and his health? And they got like a shrug. Like it was like almost saying, don't know, don't care. I didn't want to overstate it last time and say, I think I said there was a 0.0% chance Jack Eichel starts training camp with the Sabres. I don't want to increase it to 0.1%. I did wonder as the week went on and we got through the draft and Jack Eichel wasn't traded. I just think the ask is so high that Buffalo is going to have to take less in order to make it happen.
It's going to be fantastic, Frank. We looked at free agency, and of course, when we reconvene, I'll get my video stuff fixed, and so you can see my pretty face and I can see yours. And we'll have some guests breaking down free agency on Friday. Enjoy the week.
Not going to lie. Wasn't that bad not seeing you.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Seravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.